Hello chaps. Well, today is April 30th and 75 years ago, today of course, Adolf Hitler committed suicide with his wife Eva Braun. She was barely a wife for 2 days. The Battle of Berlin by this point was very firmly against Nazi Germany, as indeed the war had been for a while. The Reich was now a sliver of land, having been a great empire in 1942 at its widest stretch, and geographically speaking anyway. And the war had turned for a while, but needless to say, Hitler was deluded in his thoughts for a while, it must be said. But the Battle of Berlin, he had been stuck in his he had been in his bunker rather since around about January 30th, 45, maybe a little bit before, and other than trips out to the garden, never left the bunker or Berlin again. The bunker already had a rather surreal mentality, as you see in the film Downfall, best summed up when Trudel Young sort of freaks out during Eva Braun's party. Nothing made sense, and as it got to April 30th, reality was very firmly detached. The Russians were getting closer and closer and closer to the Reichschancellor in the Fuhrer bunker, about half a mile or so away when Hitler shot himself. Hitler trying to get divisions and the like that no longer existed to break into Berlin. He was convinced in a final victory, but even if Berlin had the manpower, it's highly unlikely they would have held out. As it was, the armed forces were mostly, it seemed, made up of old men and boys. What fighting units there were running low on ammunition. They would have ran. Friedlin said on April 28th that they would have ran out in 2 days' time. So April 30th rolls around. Steiner's counter-attack hasn't worked or materialised. Renck got so far before being driven back and was now looking after civilians that were getting wrapped up in his unit. 100,000 by the time he surrendered to Simpson at Tangamunda on May 6th or May 7th. Some kind of veil was lifted from Hitler on that afternoon. He decided that was it. No more. I have done my best, the German people can go hang, was his attitude, really. The surreal nature of the bunker took an absolute upturn at midnight, April 28th, when he did marry Eva Braun in a ceremony witnessed by anyone there, really. Braun must be one of the most, I'm tempted to say, pathetic women of history, but I'm sure somebody will correct me. She seemed utterly deluded herself, and the fact that she thought she could take cyanide to preserve her beauty, whilst the bloke next to her blew his brains and whatnot into her, one imagined. No. I am of a lone opinion that Hitler is responsible for most of the history we have nowadays. I mean, my mum said to me once that you can't feel like that, and I'm sure one of my uni lecturers would say otherwise. And the thing is about history, if you look at it, there are various avenues and the like they could have gone down. Like I said in one of my recent videos about if I think it's one of my vlogs, that if Prince Arthur had not died of the sweating sickness in 1502, the Tudor dynasty would have gone a different direction, especially if it had heirs to the throne. Henry might not have been on the throne. Elizabeth, if he had say Elizabeth as was, she by the time became queen might have gotten married and had children of her own, and then become queen in her 40s or 50s or whatever. The abdication crisis, if Edward VIII had stayed on the throne and not married Mrs. Simpson, and along comes Hitler here. You read any history of Hitler and there's thousands. Only Jesus has more words written about him, and there's various points along the path to power where he could have been checked. The Munich Putsch, he was not really punished as such, where, as Ian Kershaw says, he should have been charged with treason, and if not, executed, possibly sentenced for life or a lot longer than what he got. I think he was in prison for 9 months or whatever it was. Either way, it wasn't a deterrent. And then there's various points along the way that the German government and the like could have just crushed the Nazis, banished them, but they got into power. And Hitler's sort of raison d'etre was revenge in a way, get back at Versailles, get back at the likes of the French. Britain he seemed a bit wishy-washy on. And then World War II is the net result of it. And World War II has altered human history forever. Now, granted, as I said, there's various avenues. So, you know, my grandparents were able to meet possibly because of the war. Had the war not happened, who knows. Political history, social history, and then in most countries has been affected. I mean, the empire might have lasted into the 70s, 80s. It was a crumbling anyway, yeah, when the war happens. But if the war hadn't happened, who knows? Us taking on the likes of Japan, as well as America, because we were out in the Far East, and ships lost and everything else, and men and women, and all the way to now. I mean, there are countries in Eastern Europe and like that are still affected by the war. You know, there are divisions that run deep in certain communities and the like. And Ukraine, when it went back to Russia in 2014, there were stories in the Times newspaper about things going back to the German invasion in 1941. So I'm not saying all of history that we have now is Hitler's fault, really. But had this man not had a thirst for revenge and gotten into power in Germany in 1933, things would have been vastly different, I think, in the world today. But then, you know, you can't think like that, I suppose. Needless to say, today is the 75th anniversary of his death, and after he shot himself, things fell apart in the bunker. The cracks were starting to show. I mean, the leaders and other people couldn't wait to get out of Berlin. Speer left after saying he hadn't actually gone through with the Nero decree, and had he had Hitler half a brain, so he would have had Speer shot, I'd imagine, otherwise. I mean, he had Wegelin shot purely on the basis that he was Himmler's adjutant. Himmler's a prisoner now. His deluded efforts to make peace have failed. And then those in the bunker say, right, that's it. Break out. Some wanted to make peace. Just end the war. Berlin was dead. Thousands of women had been subjected to horrors at the hands of Soviets. Revenge was on the Soviet mind long before Battle of Berlin. And a few days on from now, the war ends. Officially, anyway. So we'll cover that at some point, hopefully.